So welcome everyone to the Wahi 2021 author series. If you're a faithful follower, you know I'm not Robin Zimmerman. My name is Janet Porter. Robin has had something come up and so is unable to attend at the last minute. So I'm going to do my best to fill in for her. She does a fabulous job as our moderator, but I'm pleased you're going to be joining us today. Robin was especially excited to meet our next speaker because she knows Dr. Kirk Neely from through her best friend. Her best friend's daughter married his son. And so she was very excited about this, and I know is really sorry to miss it today. So Kirk Neely is going to be joining us, and he's an author of many books. But the book we're going to be talking about today is his latest book called December Light 1916. And while we're waiting for others to join us, we have a couple of people who've joined us, but we want to get to know you. So we're going to continue to ask you some questions as we like to do in terms of polling. So first of all, I just want to say, one of the things I think we're all experiencing is some sense of relief now that we're vaccinated and that we can go around without masks all the time. I went to Chico's the other day and they made me wear a mask and I was like, a mask? Why do I wear a mask? No, I was very cooperative, but it does feel good to be out and about. And, we can actually hug other vaccinated people. My husband and I went out Friday night, Saturday night, and Tuesday night, which we've been totally isolated. So that was a big social calendar for us. And we were outside and enjoying the beautiful weather and hugging our friends. And it just felt great, except for the bugs that were biting. It was a perfect evening. So one of the things we're curious about is how you are. And so we're going to do what we've done before, which we have some polling questions to ask you. And today what we want to know is we want to find out how you're feeling about the CDC announcement last week that vaccinated people can take off their masks and don't need to be socially distanced from other vaccinated people. So the question is, how are you feeling about the recent CDC announcement that vaccinated people do not need to wear masks? And let me put that poll up for you. And the answers we have are for you to say thrilled, totally optimistic, pleased, cautiously optimistic, still nervous and concerned and planning to wear masks, or that you really don't know. And all you have to do to participate in the poll is to put your cursor directly on the screen on the answer that you respond to, and your vote will be counted. So I see that everybody who's attending has voted. So 100% of you are pleased and cautiously optimistic. And I would say that I fall into that category too. It's still on the honor system that people who are unvaccinated will actually, wear masks. And the concern really is that unvaccinated people are at greater risk because all of those of us who are vaccinated have a higher probability if we get the vaccine of having no symptoms, because being vaccinated just doesn't prevent you from getting COVID. If you do get it, it really reduces the likelihood that you'll have any symptoms or that you'll be hospitalized or that you'll die. So we're going to have a lot more COVID positive people walking around, not knowing they're COVID positive because they're asymptomatic, and potentially really exposing those unvaccinated people. So everything we can all do to, can help people. The club that we belong to, I asked one of the waiters if he was vaccinated. He said he didn't know how to do it. So I scheduled his appointment for him. And he was so proud to Day that he just got his second shot yesterday and thanked me so much. So, I'm kind of out and about asking everyone, are you vaccinated yet? Can I help you get, figure out how to do it? So, I think one of the questions that people are asking is, what's going to happen with CDC's recommendation for revaccination? And will CDC recommend that we have an annual COVID shot, just like we do the flu or just like you do shingles? Or will the COVID vaccine just be put into our regular flu shot? And I think most people think that we're going to end up with the COVID right in the regular flu shot. So when you go to get your flu shot, you'll get vaccinated for COVID at the same time. That's actually what's been happening for the last couple of years with what it was called, you might remember avian flu, or it's called H1N1. that flu vaccine, that has been in our flu vaccine for the last couple of years, and people didn't even realize they were being vaccinated against that uh, that virus, which people, perceived could have been a really big threat and could have been a pandemic. So, so hopefully, I'm glad to see you're pleased and cautiously optimistic. So, one of the reasons our author series is so important is it's going to provide a means for us to continue to stay in contact with each other. And this is now our 12th webinar. We're so excited. And we've got great speakers coming up, which I'm going to be talking about in a minute. We are pleased that we have webinars scheduled through the end of 2021. And so our second question before we go on and meet Kirk is, do you have trips planned for the next 3 months? So our answers are, let me put this poll up. So as you can see on the screen, our answers are yes, traveling by car, yes, traveling by plane, yes, car and plane trips are planned, or no, no trips. The people with no trips probably have people coming to visit them because we live in paradise and we have lots of company. So I'll wait a few more minutes to see if people want to respond to that. So, that's one of the things that I think people are wondering about is travel. And I know we've all been really cautious about travel. I'm actually getting on a plane tonight to go to go for a weekend with my girlfriends at Martha's Vineyard. And I did travel by plane 2 weeks ago. That was the first time I had been on a plane. People were very polite. Everyone was wearing masks. Everyone will be wearing masks on the plane today because that's still required. So I did not feel safe traveling by plane until, the last couple of weeks, as probably many of you did not. So what we find from our poll is that 50% of the people said no, they don't have any trips, and 25% said yes, they're traveling by car, and another 25% say they're traveling by plane. So kind of 50-50 whether or not we're getting out and about yet. I think it's important that we all think about our own personal safety and what seems to work best for us. If you are just joining the author series now, and some of you I've seen are just joined, we are getting to know a little bit more about our audience. Our plan right now is to offer the WAHI author series via Zoom throughout 2021. But we really want to hear from you because those of you who are in attendance right now are probably our, faithful followers. So we love that. So the next question is, do you plan to continue to attend the author series by Zoom? Even though things have opened up and maybe you've gotten to your book groups and stuff, do you plan to continue to attend by Zoom? And so the answers are yes, no, and don't know. Oh, good. 100% said they plan. Yay. Yay, Nancy and Betty and everybody else. 100% said you plan to attend, even though we're coming out of our, social isolation. So that's terrific. That's great to hear. Betty Hamilton, who will be talking later and who's our president-elect, has been a big supporter of our author series and, has advocated that we continue to do this, even though things open up. So I'm sure she'll be here to hear that. I'm pleased that you all said that. So we always like to hear about book recommendations. And I think you know how to chat. At the bottom or at the top of your computer, there's a toolbar that says chat on it. And what I'd like you to do is to indicate what we share. Please share with everyone on the webinar what book you would recommend that you've read lately. We love to hear about book recommendations. And whatever you say will be chatted to. Let me see. Let me get the chat up here. So everyone can see everyone's comments. So if you have any book recommendations, so I want to recommend a book to all of you that we don't have this author speaking, but I'd recommend the library book if you haven't read that. The library book is actually the true story, the recounting of its nonfiction of a fire that took place in the Los Angeles Library about 25 years ago. And it's really kind of a, homage to libraries in general, but it's kind of a mystery trying to figure out what happened and how the fire started. And so my book group that I'm in is reading that, and has that coming up. And I had read it a year or two ago, and I was thinking that that's a book I really wanted to recommend to you today. So with that, I just want to say that what we're planning to do is today is Nancy Fish is going to continue to do our moderation, and she'll be writing in the panelists in the discussions. And Betty Hamilton, our president-elect, will be giving you a preview of all the upcoming things that we have going on for WAHI. And I'm sure you join me in thanking Betty and Tamara and everybody on the leadership team at WAHI. It really, really takes a village. And this year it's taken a big village to keep WAHI going and to keep people connected and to offer so many new innovative programs. And it's only been possible because it's such a team. Tamara and Betty really recently recognized the whole team. And I don't know how many women were there, but it seemed like there were like 40 of us that were there being recognized for everything we've done the past year to keep WAHI members connected. Betty and I have also talked. I'm pleased to announce, and you'll hear more about this later, that the theme that Betty has come up with for WAHI during her presidency is resilience. And so Betty and I have talked, and Betty asked that we put together a reading list for 2021, 2022. So we've picked 12 books, one a month, that really focuses on resilience during all kinds of situations, young people, old people, not nonfiction, fiction, biographies, autobiographies, about amazing people who've had incredible resilience. And we're going to be kicking that off with a special author series presentation, which you'll know more about in July, with one of the people who is on the list, a woman who named Rami Little, who wrote a book called Driving Miss Norma. And she's going to kick off our author series in July. So I want you to make note of that, because the book she wrote features Hilton Head. Although she lives in the San Juan Islands right now with her husband, Tim, Hilton Head is featured prominently in the book we're going to be featuring that first night. Right? So not all the book, that's the only resilience book on the list of a dozen that actually features Hilton Head. So you definitely want to read it. And they're actually making a movie of the book, which Rami and I'll talk more about. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and get started, since it's the top of the hour. So thank you again for everyone joining us. Those of you who are just joining us now. I just want to say I'm Janet Porter. I think many of you probably have watched before and are familiar with the format we have. We usually have Robin Zimmerman here. Something came up at the last minute today, so she can't join us. So I'm going to try to do my best to carry on in her footsteps, but we miss her, and she'll be back next month. So we are really thrilled to have Dr. Kirk Neely with us to discuss his book, December Light 1916. So here's a copy of the book. I read it last week. I'm anxious to talk to him about it. Dr. Neely has an incredibly distinguished career, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a minute. But he's a pastor, an author, an illustrator, a storyteller, a professor. He has, he wears many hats, and he's received an incredible number of leadership and community service awards for the contribution he's made, particularly in Spartanburg. So if this is your first Zoom webinar, let me explain how this works. First, although you can see and hear me, no one else can see or hear you, because this is a webinar, this isn't a meeting. And second, we want to hear from you. So I just want to say again that what you want to do is, if you move your cursor to the bottom of the page, for some of you, it'll be at the top of your computer screen, some it'll be at the bottom. There's a toolbar and there's a chat function there. And all you have to do is click on that chat function, and it'll come up on your computer, and you can chat in questions. And I told Kirk that we would make this interactive and that you would ask questions, and so you can ask him anything. And he's a great storyteller, so he'll probably have a witty response for anything you ask. So Nancy Fish is going to be keeping track of our chats. So if, for example, if you have a technical problem, you can just chat that to everybody and Nancy will try to help you out. So I also want to point out that we have a change in schedule for the Wahi Author Series. So we have been meeting the third Thursday of the month, and we're going to be moving to the second Thursday of the month for June. So it's moved up to the second Thursday of the month. Still at 5 o'clock. It's still a 45-minute webinar. All of that is the same. And I'm very excited to share with you, and I really hope you'll join us for our discussion with Neville Frankel. So let me tell you who he is. He is the author of a book called Bloodlines. And this is not a new book. This book has been around. I think Neville published it about 6 years ago. And there are several books called Bloodlines on, if you would chat that in, Nancy, that would be great, by Neville Frankel. There are several books titled Bloodlines. So you want the one by Neville Frankel. So if you go to Amazon, make sure you put his name in, Neville Frankel. So in my life, I have twice in my whole life, I have loved a book so much I bought a carton. As in 20 copies, and gave one to everyone I knew. And this is one of the two books in my life that I felt that way about. Bloodlines is kind of South Africa's version of Gone with the Wind. That's the way I would describe it. It's a sweeping melodrama that takes place over decades in South Africa. It's really incredible about the history, but it's a fabulous story. So I really hope you'll join us and register for our webinar in June. Again, it'll be June 10th at 5 o'clock, not the third Thursday, the second Thursday. So now let me fill you in on today's author. As I said, we are so pleased that Dr. Kirk Neely is joining us. There are so many ways some of you may be familiar with Dr. Neely, as he is a storyteller, he's a writer, a pastor, a teacher, a counselor, and an artist. In fact, of all the books we've read, this is the first time we've had somebody who not only wrote the story, but did all the illustrations in the book. So the book is full of his illustrations, which, and a picture's worth 1,000 words. So we're grateful for that. So he's had a distinguished career as a pastor, having served as First Baptist Church in Spartanburg, the Knollwood Baptist Church in Winston-Salem. For over 18 years, he served as senior pastor at Morningside Baptist Church, where the worship services were also broadcast on several radio stations. He is a prolific writer, having written books on devotions, genealogy, and grief, along with novels such as Santa Almost Got Caught, A Good Mule is Hard to Find, and Other Stories from Clay County, and Banjos, Barbecues, and Boiled Peanuts, and Other Tales from the South. As I mentioned, he's received numerous leadership and public service awards, but perhaps most important, Kirk is the oldest of 8 children and has been married to Claire for 55 years. They are parents of 5 children and have 13 grandchildren. Since 1980, Kirk and Claire have lived in the home built by his grandparents after the Great Depression in 1937. So welcome, Kirk. We're so glad to see you today.
Thanks. It's great to be with you.
So we are thrilled that you're going to talk to us about December Light, 1916. But, I just want to say, Kirk, we always like to know about our authors. And so what we'd love to do is to have you start by talking about how you started seeing yourself. I mean, I know you saw yourself as a storyteller early on in your ministry, but when did you decide that you weren't just a storyteller, but that you were going to be an author?
That's an interesting question, and I have an important answer for you. I grew up in a family of storytellers. We didn't have a television set until I was about 9 years old. And I remember going to my uncle's house. He got a small television set. I went to his house and I watched The Lone Ranger with Clayton Moore as the Lone Ranger, Tonto and Silver. It was a half-hour program. We sat there and watched a test pattern for about 45 minutes before the program ever came on. It was broadcast from Charlotte down into Spartanburg area, a real fuzzy picture. But
Now,
when I,
Kirk, what year would this have been?
well, I'm going to let you do the math. I was born in 1944, so it was about 1953 or 54.
About 1953. Okay. Okay.
And so I watched this program, and we were going home, and my dad said, "Kirk, what do you think?" I said, "I like the radio a whole lot better." And that was true. My grandfather had one of those big Zenith radios that was like a piece of furniture, with the curved top, dome top. And I would go to my grandfather's house, which is this very house that we live in. I'd come here and we'd sit around the radio at night and listen to the radio. And we'd listen to things like, who knows what evil's in the hearts of man? Only the shadow knows. We'd listen to all the old radio personalities, but we'd also listen to the Grand Ole Opry, which we could pick up from Nashville, Tennessee. My grandfather was born in Middle Tennessee. So the radio was a different kind of entertainment. On Sunday, our family, my dad was one of 9 children. My grandmother and grandfather had 9 children, and they had 36 grandchildren. And I was the second oldest of those 36. Mom and dad had 8 children, and they had 54 grandchildren. So I'm now the senior member of the family.
Are you?
And I have all these nieces and nephews. I get a graduation invitation from every one of them this time of year. But storytelling has just been a part of the fabric of our family. My grandmother, I don't know how she did this, but she would get up on Sunday morning, fix a huge meal. We didn't call it lunch. We called it dinner. The noon meal was called dinner. The evening meal was called supper. And my grandmother would fix this huge meal. Many of us would go to her house. We'd set up extra tables in the living room, and in the warm weather, we'd set them up out in the carport. And she would feed all of us. Having been to church and Sunday school and getting back home and having the meal ready when all of us got there, she would leave just a little bit before the service was over. And after the meal, we sat around and told stories. My grandfather was a great storyteller. My dad, I had, in that family, there were 7 boys and 2 girls. And usually what happened was, I know this is very gender specific and even discriminatory, but the women and the girls would go clean up after lunch, and the men would sit around and tell stories. And my grandfather always smoked a cigar. I love the aroma of a cigar to this day because I associate it with him. So story after story after story. And after you got a little older, one of the uncles would say, "Kirk, why don't you tell us a story today?" But the story that you told couldn't be a brand new one. You had to tell one that everybody knew, and they would correct you as you go through.
Uh-huh.
You made a mistake, they'd correct you. Of course, a lot of them got enhanced. That's one of the traits of a good storyteller. They know how to gild the lily and enhance a story. So, almost every story has a big chunk of fiction in it. Even stories that are family stories and are remembered in different ways. And fiction is one of the best ways to tell the truth. You can really tell a lot of true things in a work of fiction. That's true in this book.
So how did you, with that storytelling legend and history and identity, at what point did you think I'm an author? Because you can be a storyteller, but not an author. And
Father's Day in the year 2000.
Really?
We had our own family here at our house. Claire fixed a big dinner. We called it dinner. And we were all sitting around enjoying our dessert, drinking a second cup of coffee. And my son, Eric, for Father's Day, gave me 2 books. One was called The Courage to Write, and the other one was called A Weekend Novelist. And he gave them to me. And, You know, Eric worked for the Post and Courier in Charleston. He was a reporter. He did real well there. I mean, one year he won what's called the best of the best, the State Journalism Award for the best story. It was a story about a boat with a Ukrainian crew that got stranded in Charleston Harbor because the captain left. He wasn't paid. He just left the boat. And of course, the crew could not leave because if they did, they'd lose their pay. And they had been in Charleston Harbor on that boat for about 3 months. And Eric heard about it and he went to Samaritan's Purse. And he said, do you know there's a boat there's sailors out there. I think there are 8 sailors on that boat. And they haven't had any fresh water, haven't had any fresh food for 3 months. And Samaritan's Purse said, we'll go out there and check on them. And Eric said, I want to go with you. So he got on the boat with Samaritan's Purse, took a little camera with him and went out there, took pictures of these sailors and wrote a big article for the Charleston Post and Courier. And on Sunday morning, it was above the fold in the Sunday paper, on the front page of the Sunday paper. And he followed this up with several more reports. One of the sailors actually died, and the city of Charleston paid the expense of sending his body back to his family. All of them eventually went back to the Ukraine, and the people of Charleston paid for that. So it was a story that really moved the awareness and the conscience of the city of Charleston. So Eric was a reporter. At the Charleston Post and Courier, they would receive books to be reviewed. If I sent this book to be reviewed to the Charleston Post and Courier, they cut the front page in half and throw it in a box. They would not review any book that was paperback. So if it was not a hardback, it was just a lost ball in high weeds. Once it got to the newspaper, they weren't going to review it. So these boxes accumulated with these books that had half the cover gone. And any reporter for the Charleston Post and Courier could go into those boxes and get whatever they wanted. And Eric always had a book, but always had half a cover on it.
Yeah.
He got them out of that box. Well, that's where he did my Father's Day shopping. Those 2 books I got had half the cover off. I told him one time, I said, don't do that to your mama. You know, you buy her a real gift. If you need money to buy her a real gift, I'll help you out with that. But I said, I like getting these books that are free. So he gave me those 2 books. And we're sitting there at the table. And he said, Dad, you've got to write these stories. He said, you got so many stories. And he said, if you don't write them down, they're going to be lost. He said, Dad, you know what's going to happen? You're going to die and leave us with all these stories, none of them written down, and we're not going to be able to remember them. We want you to write these stories down. You know what happened? The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, that same year, Eric died, and he died suddenly. He died in Charleston. He had epilepsy since he was 6 years old.
Oh
and
my
he had
God.
a seizure. He went into cardiac arrest and his heart didn't start again. So there he was, a reporter for the Charleston Post and Courier, married, left behind a 23-year-old widow. Both of them were Furman graduates. And this piercing memory, Dad, you've got to write these stories. If you don't write them down, they're going to be gone. Well, Jen was an artist. Jen majored in art at Furman. And so now here I am, father-in-law to a 23-year-old widow. She said I was like her daddy because her daddy left her home when she was 8 years old. And she didn't see him again until she graduated from Furman. So, I mean, he was just absent. And she said I was like her daddy. So after Eric died, I thought, you know, my prayer was, Lord, what can I do to help this young woman? And I thought, well, she's got this ability. So I thought maybe there's a way that I can jumpstart an art career for her. So I every year at Morningside Baptist Church, I wrote an original Christmas story. The first year was not original. It was a story right out of my childhood about a time when I got pressed into playing the part of Joseph in the Christmas pageant. And I told a story. It was very much like the best Christmas pageant ever. You know, that little book, The Best
Yeah,
Christmas
yeah,
Pageant
yeah.
Ever. Very much like that, but it was my story. And I told that story the very first Christmas. I was at Morningside Baptist Church, and the people said, "You got to do this every year. Just do this. Just tell us a story every year." Well, I started writing a story every year. They gave me a week off to go somewhere and write the story. A lot of them got their start on Hilton Head because
Wow.
I came down to Hilton Head every January to be kind of like a chaplain for a big conference for ministers of music. And I'd come down there, and Claire and I would have time, and we'd start talking about the Christmas story. And then, you know, by midsummer, the thing was taking shape, and the church would give me a 1 week off in the fall to go somewhere and finish the story.
Mm.
I wrote them all in a week's time, but they were very popular. I mean, we'd pack the sanctuary out for 2 services on Sunday morning. People in the community would come, and Sandlapper magazine did an article on this back when Aida Rogers was the editor of the Sandlapper magazine. And so this is how my reputation as a storyteller really kind of got a jump start.
And so that's how you also began to see yourself as an author, which is so interesting. So I want to make sure that we get to talking a little bit about December Light. So I told you when I talked to you earlier this week, Kurt, that, and maybe many people in the audience will identify with this, that your book reminded me of Jan Karen's The Mitford series. So some of you may have read the Mitford series. Jan Karen is a North Carolina author who has a starring character in her books called Pastor Tim Cavanaugh. And he's an Episcopalian priest. And, you know, it takes place in a mythical town of Mitford, North Carolina, but it has they are absolutely sweet books, slice of life novels, but they're filled with spirituality. And
I believe that town is actually Blowing Rock.
Oh, I think it is Blowing Rock, but it's called Mitford. I mean, it's modeled on Blowing Rock. So, you know, I just want to repeat that again, that I made the comparison because your book, December Light, 1916, and Jan Karen's books are both sweet, slice of life novels filled with spirituality. So, Kirk, without spoiling the secret of all the surprises that come up in December Light, 1916, why don't you give us a brief overview, particularly about the 2 major characters, Eli and Sam?
The question always comes, why 1916?
I was going to ask that.
Yeah.
That was my next question, but you answered that already.
May I answer that? Yeah. As you know, the story has a lot of time-specific occurrences because, not to give too much of it away, but it had to be at a year when Hanukkah and Christmas overlapped. When Hanukkah came about Christmas time. That doesn't always happen, but it happens pretty frequently. So I had to find a year where Hanukkah and Christmas sort of overlapped. And I went back and looked at old calendars until I found 1916. It needed a year, the December Light, you see the lighthouse on the cover. So the light had to be a lighthouse that still used fuel oil or lighthouse oil. And that was produced by Texaco Oil Company. And the lighthouse oil came in 5-gallon cans with a big Texaco star on it. And it was a special oil, very much like kerosene, quite flammable, but not quite as flammable as, say, gasoline. But that was what they used for the oil in the lighthouse. The lens in those lighthouses was called a Fresnel lens, developed by a Frenchman. And the lighthouse keeper had to go up in the tower every night right before sunset, fill the oil, fill the lamp, and use an official lighthouse service match and light that lamp. And at Georgetown, which is where this story occurs, that lighthouse is one that most South Carolinians knew nothing about because it's so far out in Winyah Bay. You can't drive out there. You can take a boat and go. It's 13 miles out in Winyah Bay, at the mouth of Winyah Bay. So you got this light. You need a Jewish lighthouse keeper. And so I got created a Ukrainian immigrant, Eli Solomon, because Georgetown had a very large, for the size, a very significant Jewish population. Georgetown had 7 mayors that were Jewish. A lot of the commerce in and out of the city came through a man named Hyman Kaminsky. You can go to Georgetown, and you see the historic house of Hyman Kaminsky. And in my story, he's the one that gives Eli a job working in his mercantile business, and then has a lot of influence in getting him placed as an assistant lighthouse keeper. So Eli is the Jewish lighthouse keeper in Georgetown. Samuel is a former slave. The last rice plantation in Georgetown County was owned by a woman named Ms. Pringle. And as happened in a lot of situations, in my story, Samuel took the name of the people that owned him. So he's Samuel Pringle. He was an unusual man. He was born what's called under the call, and the slaves in All Saints Parish believed that a child born under the call would not drown. And so, especially if the call is the amniotic sac that remains on a child, doesn't hurt the child at all, but it has to be removed by the midwife. And a lot of times the midwife would make a decision about whether to make a tea out of that amniotic sac and give it to the mother, or whether they would preserve the amniotic sac as a kind of talisman, a good luck charm. And Samuel's mother decided to preserve it. Sailors would often try to buy those from the Black population because of this tradition that a person born behind the call could not drown. So if they purchased the call and had it, they thought that would protect them from drowning. So just a lot of the Gullah Geechee culture is mixed into my book. And that, Janet, that was a big decision for me, whether or not to try to use the dialect. And I'd listened to it a lot. We spent a lot of time at the coast. When I was a boy, I spent a lot of time with my grandfather fishing at the coast. And I'd heard that language, and I knew that there was no such thing as a pure Gullah accent or pure Geechee accent. I knew that the thing I was hearing was some kind of amalgam. And that's true of Samuel Pringle in my story. He uses the Gullah accent, but he also has a big dose of just some sort of revision of that comes naturally by just living your life. So those are the 2 protagonists, Eli Solomon, the Jewish lighthouse keeper, and Samuel Pringle, the former slave. They become friends, although they only see each other about once a month. In order to get supplies, Eli has to row a skiff into Georgetown, 13 miles. He has to go in on the rising tide and come back out to the lighthouse on the falling tide because that makes the trip better. He also has modified the boat so that he actually can hoist a sail, drop what's called a keel board, and steer the boat with one oar, like a big rudder that is mounted to a lock in the back of the boat. He's quite a seaman. Eli is, because he learned how to survive on the ocean uh, with his grandfathers on the Black Sea in the Ukraine. He has had a terrible loss in his life, and that loss just sent him into spiraling grief. He decided he was going to leave the Ukraine. It was a time of the pogroms, lots of persecution of Jewish people. And he had an uncle who had come to Georgetown. So he traveled all the way to Georgetown, going through Canada and down through the northern states, and finally ending up down there with his uncle. And he's really made a lot.
But Kirk, despite the fact that those are the two main characters, if you haven't read the book, you probably think, okay, you're talking about two characters, but a lot happens in this book with those two main characters and with other characters, some characters who are, not nice to either Samuel or Eli, and that's putting it mildly, who are bigoted and racist and not nice people. So,
They're
a
the
lot happens.
antagonists. They're the antagonists.
They're your, yeah.
And they come at a time when slavery has ended, but blacks are still very much discriminated.
Second-class citizens.
But in Georgetown, the culture was a little different. Georgetown actually had 20 years of what was called the fusion period, when for every public office, they elected both a black and a white person.
Yeah.
And it worked really well until there was a murder that really did happen in Georgetown. And then then the Jim Crow era came in spades down there. There was a guy who was, his name's been in the news a lot. His name was Pitchfork Ben Tillman. There's a big building at Clemson named for him. And there's been a lot of hubbub about whether or not they're going to let the name Tillman still be at a state university, because he was a terrible racist. Teddy Roosevelt invited Booker T. Washington to dine at the White House with him. And the next day in the Senate, Ben Tillman got up and said in very racist language, now that the president's done this, we'll have to lynch 1,000 of them in South Carolina to put them back in.
Yes.
It's a terrible, terrible.
So Kirk, I was listening to NPR a while ago, and I heard, and somebody was interviewing an author, and they asked a really good question, which I think is really appropriate, because I think everybody who's listening today can tell that you love to do research and to think about the context of the story. So what is it about writing that you most love? Is it the research or creating the story, or is it character development, or is it thinking about what message do I want to get across? I mean, what brings you the most joy about the writing process?
Well, first of all, I want to quote Pat Conroy. Pat Conroy said that every time he wrote a book, he had a mental breakdown. He said, writing will just drive you crazy. And there's a lot of truth in that. I wake up in the middle of the night. I keep a legal pad by my bed. And I wake up in the middle of the night with a plot line.
Oh, do you?
I don't know where these things come from. Some people talk about the muse. They say if you're an artist or a writer, there's a muse that comes and sits on your shoulder and inspires you. As a pastor, I might call it the Spirit of God. But it's something that is creative. It's a creative influence. And I prefer to think of it in spiritual terms. But when that's going to come, I don't know. Ideas are very fragile. And if you don't find a way to preserve them, you're going to lose them. You'll never remember all the things that occurred to you. So I've gotten in the habit of keeping a little journal and taking it around with me. And some of the best writings that I've done in that journal were the last 3 years of my father's life. He died when he was 90. And after my mother died, Dad and I would go to breakfast about twice a week. And I always took that journal because he always had a new story. You'd think I'd heard them all, but no, there were many stories. So you have to find a way to preserve these ideas. And then once you have that, you have to decide what you're going to use and what you're not going to use. And you just let your imagination cultivate the story. I actually do a timeline for the stories that I write.
Do you?
Yeah. And for this one in particular, I put the timeline in the front of the book.
Yeah, I know.
Because it was a mixture of fact and fiction.
Right.
I also created a sketch of the lighthouse complex.
Yes.
And I got a good map of Winyah Bay. Winyah Bay is a massive estuary, and a lot of things happen in that bay. A lot of things happen in that bay in my story.
So did you start with the notion that you wanted to, based on the comments you made earlier about Texaco and the oil cans, did you start with thinking that I want to write a story about a lighthouse? Did you think?
I thought I want to write a story that merges Hanukkah and Christmas.
That was really your origin. Now, see, I did not get that from the book.
Yeah.
I did not. I mean, I understood that was that, but I would never have thought that's what you started with.
That's where I started.
Oh, it is.
And then, and that was about 15 years ago.
Oh my gosh. And
it took about 15 years to write this book.
Okay, then I don't want to ruin the surprises again, Kirk. But then when you had done your timeline, you knew all about the surprises in the book from the very beginning. So you were writing towards that point. You know, Anita Shreve said when I, met her that she always wrote the last sentence of her book first. And that she always knew where she was going to in the book, that she was working towards that last sentence, which made me want to go back and read her books, by the way. But so you knew where you were going with this the whole time you wrote it?
That's giving me too much credit.
Oh, okay.
I had an idea. Stephen
did.
Covey, in his Principles of Leadership,
yes,
says begin with the end in mind.
That's right.
Okay, I think that's the first one he talks about. But I had in mind how this thing was going to end.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I knew it was going to end with the conjunction of the Hanukkah story and the Christmas story.
Okay.
And that there were going to be two different representatives of those two stories. The breakthrough for me came when I realized that I could not write this book just as a novel, that there was too much history that had to be woven into the fabric of this thing. And it was a multicultural history.
Yes.
Because it was the culture of the Gullah people in lower South Carolina. And it was a history of Jewish immigrants. And so I had to have a Jewish component and a Christian component. And these two guys, I think, are remarkable men, both of them, Eli Solomon and Samuel Pringle.
Yeah, they both been through a lot.
Both been through a lot. One person pointed out, and I was doing a panel, and an African-American woman said, you realize that everybody in your story has a missing part? There's somebody, they have some pain, some difficulty, some limitation that they're all facing.
You know what? I missed the Hanukkah Christmas part, but I got that. Yeah. I would have said the same thing. I figured that out. I thought that was interesting in terms of character development. So, first of all, Kurt, what we love to do is we love to stimulate people who are listening's interest in going and buying the book of the author, which I know is what you'd love to. And I think this conversation today, because you're so incredibly engaging and such a great storyteller, I think you've really stimulated people to go out and buy your book. And I appreciate the fact that I got to have a conversation with you that made that happen. So thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it too. Appreciate being here.
And stay in touch. I look forward to your next book.
I'm working on it.
Are you? Well,
It's my grandfather's life. It's kind of a fictitious memoir, but I call it Splinters, Tales from the Lumberyard.
oh my gosh. Oh, great. Well, I'll look forward to that. Thank you so much, Kirk.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And now what I'd like to do is to invite Betty Hamilton to join us. So Betty, most of you know, is the president-elect of WAHI and will be taking office in June, and has been working hard for months to get ready for assumption of that mantle of responsibility. And Betty, I know you're going to share with us a lot of things that are upcoming for WAHI that people will be interested in hearing about.
I will do that without giving away too many secrets, but I just want to say first, he reminds me of my growing up and sitting around listening to the tales that my grandfather told. What a remarkable man. I can't wait to read this book.
You know what? I thought the same thing. I can remember as children sitting around at my grandfather's feet, listening to my grandfather tell stories.
Absolutely. I mean, what a charming gentleman. I could listen to him for hours. Thank you for having him. What a pleasure.
You're welcome, Betty.
Betty, this is Kirk.
Yes.
I'll dance at your wedding.
Which one? Okay. Just a reminder to all of you who did this radio program. Just a reminder that the WAHI membership renewals are going to be open online on June 1st. So please start doing your renewals right away so that you don't miss out on being able to participate in the rest of the author series over the summer. I also want to remind you to continue to check your weekly pink paper newsletter that comes out in an e-blast on Wednesday mornings throughout the summer. Some people think that WAHI rests over the summer. Not true. We are going to continue to be providing activities, and we don't want you to miss anything. And for those of you who like water adventure and are a little bit braver than myself, there are a number of those that are available to sign up for. Again, that will be the announcement of those come through your weekly newsletter with a link to sign up. And yesterday, you probably all saw in the newsletter that we have an updated WAHI policy on COVID. We continue to follow the CDC guidelines regarding masking, group participation, and of course, we always encourage our members to get vaccinated. The really good news out of all of this is that in accordance with the latest guidelines, fully vaccinated members will not be required to mask up indoors or outdoors in small or large group settings. So we're going to feel a little bit freer about that. However, the members in WAHI who have not been able to be vaccinated yet will still be required to wear masks for their own protection. Interest groups have started up or are making plans to begin meeting in the fall. So they're being asked to assess their individual group membership needs and set the appropriate guidelines as necessary for their activities. Janet did mention the next author series with Neville Frankel, the author of Bloodlines, and that series, that event on June 10th is now open for registration. So again, go back to your pink paper and click on the link to register for that exciting interview. There will be a full lineup, as Janet said, of authors over the summer. This series also, don't forget, is moving to the second Thursday of the month. If you're used to having the original schedule, now it's the second Thursday. On July 8th, Kristen Harmel will return. On August 12th, Mary Alice Monroe will be with us. And September 9th, Susan Cushman. As Janet also mentioned, the theme that is kind of the underpinning of all that we're looking at doing for the coming year is resilience. WAHI as an organization is really resilient, and we all are well aware that each of us has been resilient throughout this past year. So to help you think more about what that means and how many different forms it can take, Janet has helped to come up with a list of books that you might want to read at your leisure. This is not required reading at all, but just some ideas to kind of spark your thinking about what resilience means and how it has played out in your life. And this list is going to be published probably during July in one of your weekly newsletters. As a heads up for the fall, as far as activities that are already on the books, our kickoff luncheon is scheduled for September 23rd, and we will be back at the beautiful pavilion at the Coastal Discovery Museum. We're very pleased to announce our keynote speaker, Dr. Debbie Lines. Debbie is a well-known local TV talk show host. She's a psychologist, a mother, a grandmother, an all-around delightful personality who is going to entertain us with stories about how resilience has played a significant part throughout her life. You won't want to miss that. She is absolutely a ray of sunshine and a very interesting female to talk with. One last thing, it takes a lot of thought and time to produce this author series that we have all enjoyed over the past 12 months. Janet Porter has done an extraordinary job of bringing these best-selling authors to us and expanding our personal reading experience. And we all have a big shout out to Janet for her efforts, for her imagination, and for her time and talents to bring this very important program to us. To continue this popular WAHI event, though, Janet needs help. She's looking for a co-chair to assist her with some of the tasks that she has to follow through on. As avid readers, all of you, please consider volunteering some of your time to help Janet so we can continue to benefit from and enjoy this great program. Just email Janet, give her a phone call, whatever you're willing to do, she will certainly appreciate it. Thank you, Janet. Back to you.
Thank you, Betty. Thanks for recruiting a helpmate for me. My co-chair, some of you know, who started on this, Linda Kennan, was terrific about helping getting us kicked off on getting this off the ground. And she moved to Indiana, shortly after we started. So we miss her, and I do need help. So I want to thank Betty and Kirk, and as always, Nancy Fish, for making this another stimulating seminar. I want to remind you all that we record our author series, and the videos are available to members on the WAHI website. Think about having one of your book groups read one of the featured books and then watch the video to learn more about the author. I think that really enhances the reading experience. Please let us know if you want to hear from specific authors. You can send me an email at janetporterphd@gmail.com. We'll try to book your favorite authors. If you love authors, the best way you can do that is to show you love them is to buy their book. You all know we have a long-standing relationship with Barnes & Noble. on Hilton Head. And so we hope you'll stop by and pick up a copy of December Light 1916. Please join us for our next Wahi author series on June 10th for a discussion with Neville Frankel about his book Bloodlines. Again, a sweeping melodrama taking place in South Africa. And thank you for joining us, and enjoy the spring weather.